It's a beautiful sunny day here in Bristol, and today we're going to be fixing a small oil leak on this 2004 Mercedes SL55 AMG, and also hopefully changing the crankshaft position sensor. Our small oil leak is coming from the valve cover gaskets, which is not uncommon on the M112 and M113k engines. And the good thing about this car is the valve cover gaskets are rubber gaskets, so you can do this job relatively easy. On other older Mercedes, the valve covers would be RTV'd on, which makes things slightly trickier. If you don't address the small valve cover gasket leaks, which will happen after about 40,000 miles, or in this case 20 years, you will start to not only mess up your engine bay, but potentially get oil dripping on the manifold, causing smoke and smells coming in through the car, and in the worst case scenario, actually a fire. And often those valve cover gasket leaks will get so bad that you start to see oil dripping underneath the car, and it's quite tricky to actually see where that oil is coming from. The valve cover gaskets are readily available from Mercedes. They're not expensive. And when you buy them from Mercedes, they come on these cardboard backings here. There are aftermarket products as well, which tend to come scrumpled up in a bag, and that can often cause little kinks. So if you are buying an aftermarket valve cover gasket, my advice would be to soak it in warm water before putting it on. But in this particular case, my advice would be go along to Mercedes and get the genuine gaskets. They are slightly different and, in my opinion, slightly better. To do this job yourself will cost you anywhere between £50 and £100 in parts. To take it into either an independent shop or to a Mercedes garage will cost you anywhere between £500 and probably £1,200, depending on where you take it. What you'll often find is after 20 years and numerous heat cycles, the rubber pipes, the rubber breather pipes attached to those valve covers will become brittle, and in the worst case scenario you may even crack them. So my advice would be, while you're doing this job, to change these pipes. Once again, they're not super expensive, they're freely available from Mercedes. We'll be changing ours. The other thing that we'll be changing while we're in there is the crankshaft position sensor. Now that should be changed every 13,000 miles, and that is one little sensor that can actually stop you dead. When that starts going wrong, you'll start to see stuttering at idle, possibly engine cutting out at traffic lights. When it fails completely, your car won't work, and you'll see a code if you scan the car. But with an intermittent problem, when it starts failing, you may not necessarily see a code if you put a scanner on the car. When you're taking out the ignition wires, often these plugs are broken, either because people push down the plastic tabs too much and they snap off, or simply through age they become brittle. So we will be showing you how to replace those. Once again, they're freely available from Mercedes, they're not expensive. Just before we start the job, you could also replace the air cabin air filters, pollen filters, while you're doing this. We're not going to do that on this occasion because we'll come back and do a separate video on that. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to remove is this plastic trim piece here, and it just pulls straight up. To make your life a little bit easier, you can put the hood in service mode simply by pushing in this catch here, and then the hood will go up to 90 degrees. Unfortunately, we can't do that here because it'll hit the top of that. If you've never taken this off before, there are 4 clips at the back there, and then these 2 clips here at the front. Next up, we're going to remove these 2 air pipes here and here. They just pull straight off. And then finally, this air box here has to come off. You lift it at the front and it's held on by a clip at the back. There's another clip here that clips onto that rubber piece there that you need to undo, and there are some rubber buffers that may fall off here when you're taking this out, so just be careful that you don't lose those. To undo these clips here, you have to just lift this gently, but it may be brittle, so just be careful when you're lifting it. Once you've undone the clip here, this is also attached to the valve block there with a hose just here, which we're just going to pop off. Now that you've got this off, you can have a closer look at these clips here. The lower clip needs to be lifted off to get this off, and the top clip needs to come up. The rubber buffers, there are 4 of them. This one here has come off, so just double check when you take your airbox off that you've got all the rubber bumpers on. Sometimes these jobs can go on much longer than expected, so my advice would be to put a rubber glove over the air intake here. And if you do find that one of your plastic clips is broken off when you're taking the whole airbox off, make sure that the broken bit isn't lodged in here, because if that gets in the supercharger, you could knacker your engine. This here is the first of the pipes that we're going to be replacing, the part number there. And now our pipe is actually in really good condition, but sometimes when you take these pipes off, they will crack as you take them off. When you come to put the new rubber hoses on, they'll be tighter. So my advice would be put a little bit of silicone around there. Remember, never use oil to lubricate rubber fittings. This is the old pipe here, and you can just see the first signs of gunk and corrosion building up in there. With the airbox off, you can see the source of our leak here. Before you even think about taking these valve cover gaskets off, you want to be cleaning up as much of the loose dirt, especially around the top, as you possibly can, because you don't want that falling into the engine bay. If you do not happen to have an air compressor and you want to make your own, it's relatively simple to do so. You just get a 2-litre Coke bottle like this, a little tire inflator, then you can pressurize the Coke bottle, unscrew this here, and then you've got a little canister of compressed air just to help clean up those valve cover gaskets. This is pressurized to 50 psi. After you finish cleaning out or blowing out as much of the debris as you can, we're going to start undoing these ignition wires here. Now in this particular case, this ignition wire is cable tied onto the coil plug, so make a note of that and don't forget to replace that cable tie. We're going to unplug these, hopefully without breaking the plugs, and then pin them out of the way so they're not in the way when we get the throttle body off. Let's see if we can get this plug off here without breaking it. Now you can see that it just has to go over that catch, and once it's over the catch it should come off. We managed to get all of those plugs off without breaking them, and what we're going to do is just cable tie this out of the way. Next up, we're going to take the coil packs off. They're just held on by these screws. They shouldn't be too tight, just torque to 8 Newton meters. You want to avoid dropping these bolts into the engine bay, and one of the ways you could do that is just to stick a big magnet on the end like that. Once you've got all of those 4 bolts out, you can just move these coil packs out the way. You could, to make your life easier, take the coil packs off completely and unplug them from the spark plugs, but sometimes they can be incredibly difficult to get off, and you don't need to do that to remove the valve cover. To get the valve cover off, you're going to be using an E10 to undo these bolts. We've also got to undo this pipe here, and that can be really difficult to get off without proper pipe pullers, but we'll give it a red hot go. We do have a spare one of these pipes to fit, but it is incredibly fiddly without taking all of this off. Finally, with significantly less knuckles than I had before, get that off. It's time to start taking out the bolts that hold on the valve cover, but just remember on this side here, 2 of those bolts go through brackets, and one of those bolts holds down an earth strap. This lower bracket bolt out first, and then we'll take the bolt with the earth strap off next. I like to just get a piece of cardboard and just mark on there the position of the bolts and what they're holding down. I'm just going to undo this plug here and move it out of the way, hopefully not forgetting to put it back, because that'll be in our way when we come to take the valve cover off. These 2 bolts here are longer than the other bolts. This is the last bolt to come out. These are barely torqued at all. It's amazing, they're almost just finger tight. Now in theory, once you've got those 11 bolts off, this should just, pull off. In fact, it does. Sometimes you might need to tap it with a little rubber mallet, but these are magnesium heads, so be extremely careful when you're tapping away. Well, that's quite unusual. Usually the gasket comes off with the valve cover. Now you can see there's quite a lot of grime in there, so we're going to go in there very carefully just with a watchmaker screwdriver and a little brush and get all of that out so it doesn't fall into the engine bay. Whilst it is possible to get the valve cover off without removing the coil packs, it is quite tricky to get in there and clean with the coil packs in place. You can use these little swabs here, which we just bought a whole load of them from Amazon when we were doing the injectors on the 280 SL, but it's probably better to actually take these out. The chance of them getting them out with your hand is quite slim. You generally have to use a coil pack removal tool, and it's easier doing that with the valve cover in place, just so that you've got the leverage and don't damage anything. With the valve cover removed, you will get small drops of oil dribbling down onto the manifold, and the way to stop that, well, not stop the dribbling, but stop the mess, is just to put a piece of tissue or cloth along top of the manifold, especially if you're going to have this off for any period of time because you're cleaning it. The most important thing to clean is the place, the surfaces where the gasket is actually going to sit, and these things here are brilliant for getting into those little channels and cleaning them out with all the old dirty oil, etc. One thing you will notice if you look closely is that these little metal bits here are all raised up, which means that you can't over compress this seal, but what you can do obviously is snap one of the bolts or strip one of the threads if you try and over torque them when you're putting it back on. Now if you really want to, you can go overboard or go to town cleaning this up. I'm not going to bother, I'm just going to wipe out all the old oil. A good way to clean this is actually in a big bowl with dishwasher and powder. That's one of the most effective ways to get all of that grime off. But as I say, I'm just going to make sure the channels are nice and clean and then put it back on. When you've cleaned all the channels to the best of your ability, it's time to fit the new seal. And you just need to take your time to make sure that it's actually fitted in there nicely. Now some people use silicone here to keep the seal in, but you shouldn't need to. Now what I haven't done on this occasion is replaced the sealant for the breather covers here, or the surge tank covers. I may live to regret that, but they don't appear to be leaking, so I'm not going to mess with them at this moment. If you do want to take that off, you need to take these two screws out, and it's a good idea to actually renew them. Some people say you should renew them with stainless steel, but sometimes stainless steel can actually react with the magnesium, so that in my opinion the best idea is just simply to renew them for Mercedes. The sealant that you're going to need is either the Mercedes sealant that they recommend, or you can use Permatex, the right stuff. And what you should do is put the sealant on first and then put the top on, leave it for 20 minutes to cure with these two bolts just in finger tight, and then do the final torque, just 3 to 4 Newton meters, and do not strip the threads because obviously you're stripping into magnesium, which is particularly soft. Once again, I would use Permatex anti-seize for these and make sure the threads and holes are properly cleaned out from any old sealant before you put the new bolts in. Before you put the valve cover back on, just make sure that the actual surfaces here are clean. Now these bits of grime here, it would be wonderful if you can get those off, maybe using a little plastic scraper tool, but remember the seal actually sits here and not there, so it's not too much of a tragedy if you can't get those little bits of crud off. I am going to take out these coil packs before putting the valve cover on because it's much easier. Now just bear in mind that whilst the coil packs themselves are all exactly the same, make a note of which coil pack goes from where, because the actual length of the wires can be different on different model cars. Just remember that the wire closest to your face is the wire that goes closest to the fan belt or the front of the car, and the back wire, the one closest to the engine block here, goes closest to the bulkhead. It is much easier getting this valve cover back on if you have removed the coil packs. I'm just going to put these bolts in slowly but surely, remembering which bolts have a bracket and an earth strap. So this bottom one has this bracket attached, and when you attach it, you need to attach it in such a way that the plastic thing is not rubbing on the belt. Just remember to plug that back in. Don't forget to put this breather hose back on. It goes on much easier if you put a bit of silicone on there before you put it on. We've got all of those bolts in finger tight, And now we're going to just go and torque them first to 4 Newton meters, starting in the middle and then working outwards in a crisscross pattern. The torque spec on these valve cover bolts on the M113k engine is often given at 8 Newton meters, but it's actually 9 Newton meters. And indeed, some people actually torque them to 10 Newton meters. Certainly when we took them off, they were not torqued very hard at all. The torque spec on the actual injector coil screws is 8 Newton meters on both the M112 and the M113. As I say, on the M112 engine, the torque spec is just 8 Newton meters. On the M113, it's 9 Newton meters. When it comes to torquing up these valve cover bolts, you may find that you need a different torque wrench. Usually we use a torque wrench adapter like this, which is absolutely fine for doing easily accessible bolts, but the size of this means that you can't actually get down there. So in this particular case, we are using this excellent snap-on wrench, which not only goes down to a torque of 6 Newton meters, but has this flex head here, which makes it really easy to get into awkward spaces. These torque wrenches, incidentally, are not cheap. This was an eBay special. It cost us £250. New, they are about £450. This here is a digital wrench that will make an audible sound and buzz in your hand when you get to the torque. You can also get a torque or tech angle wrench, which also allows you to do angles, and obviously you can get the click type wrenches as well. The benefit of the digital ones is they don't tend to need calibrating as much as the click type ones. The benefit of the click type ones is you can't actually over torque a bolt. On the digital ones, you can over torque bolts, especially at very low torque, like 8 Newton meters. So you will find that if you set this wrench, for example, at 8 Newton meters and torque it up, you're actually torquing the bolt to 9.7 Newton meters. So on very low torque bolts, set the torque on the wrench slightly lower and you'll find you probably get close to the exact torque. Before you tighten down the coil packs, remember to put in the cable ties. On this side there's only one cable tie, but your car may have cable ties all the way along, so don't tighten these up before you've put the cable ties in. So these torqued to 8 Newton meters. Now we just need to plug these back in. Now we didn't break any of the plugs, otherwise I would have shown you how to take the plug off using a special tool and then put it back on again. But as we haven't broken any on this side, we might do that on the next side. Now just before we move on from this side, when we took the gasket off, to be honest, there was nothing much wrong with our gasket. Sometimes you'll see it frayed at the edges. So if you do have a leak, one of the things you can just check is that all the bolts are actually torqued up to either 8 Newton meters if you've got an M112 engine, or 9 Newton meters if you've got an M113 engine, because when we took our bolts off, they seemed incredibly loose, which might have accounted for why we had a leak. When you come to do the other valve gasket, there's a few differences. First of all, there are 2 cable ties instead of just 1. Secondly, you're going to have to undo this fuel pipe here and cable tie it out of the way. And if your car has been driven recently, you're not going to need to release the fuel pressure in the rail, and you can either do that here, that's just like a bicycle valve that you push in, or a car tire valve, or you can simply just undo the petrol cap at the back here, and that will release the fuel pressure as well. We'll start off undoing this here. We've released the fuel pressure. This is torqued to just 38 Newton meters. Make sure you have a rag underneath there when you take this off. And in our particular case, we're also going to stick a bung in there. These are just a set of bungs I got off Amazon. It's really useful if you're doing spark plug work or anything like that, to plug up the holes, especially if you're going to be leaving holes in the engine bay for any period of time. It's a great little kit to have. We'll just cable tie that fuel pipe out the way there. Next up, we're going to take this pipe here off and try to avoid losing as much skin off our knuckles as we did last time. These can be on pretty tight. This is well just to try twisting them first like that to break any corrosion. Eventually we'll get that pipe off. Just just going to cut these cable ties here, hopefully without cutting the wires. Easier said than done sometimes. Now we'll see how many of these plugs we can get off without breaking them. 4 of those came off without breaking. Next up, we'll just take these coil pack bolts out, and once again you can use a magnet on the end of the bit to avoid dropping those screws into the engine bay and wasting hours of your time trying to retrieve them. We're going to take out these coil packs and see if they come out as easily as the other ones, so you don't strictly need to take them out for this job. We're just using an open 17mm spanner, just gently levering that and pulling with the other hand, never pulling on the wires. Before we start undoing any of the bolts, we're just going to clear up some of this crud along the top here just to avoid it falling in the engine block, and make a note of where that label goes. You've cleaned up, brushed away, blown away any gunk, and make a careful note of which bolts go where. Bolts like that, for example, hold on that bracket. I'm just going to use a cardboard template marking which bolts hold a bracket like this and which are longer bolts. Got all those bolts out, 5 along the bottom, 6 along the top, and 4 of those long bolts that go through this top breather cover here are obviously longer. In theory, all I have to do now is give this a little tug, so it should just come straight up. You will get little residual drips of oil while you're cleaning the valve cover, so put something underneath to stop that oil dripping on the manifold. And if you're lucky enough for your gasket to be here, before you take it off, just to scrape some of those that dirt there before it falls into the engine. Once again, this valve cover gasket does not look particularly bad. It's not particularly hard. It's still got plenty of life in it, but there were leaks either from the valve cover gasket or from the top breather cover, which we're going to reseal. If you did use a rag to catch the petrol when you disconnected the fuel line, you can use that petrol-y rag to clean this all up. It works as a good solvent for grease. Next up, we are going to take these 3 little bolts out here, and it is not uncommon for these to shear off when you're taking them out, but they're only torqued to about 4 Newton meters from memory, so they should come out relatively easily. So far so good. Okay, these bolts are going to be covered with sealant when you take them out, and it's important, if you are reusing the bolts, ideally you should just use new bolts to get all of that sealant off the threads before you put it back in, and possibly even run a thread chaser through there so that when you're putting the new bolt in, you don't have any chance of crossing those threads. In theory, once you've got those 3 screws out, this should just lift off. Sometimes you need to give it a gentle tap with a hammer or even lever it with a screwdriver. Obviously, this is extremely fragile, so if you are going to be using a screwdriver or anything like that, you've got to be so careful not to damage this. Just using a large flat blade screwdriver, taking our time, eventually with a bit of gentle persuasion, that should come off. There's not really a quick way to do this, and all I can say is the better job, the more time you take getting the old sealant off, the more chance you have of the cover actually sealing properly when you put the new sealant on. But it's not a 5-minute job. Just remember, when you're applying the sealant, one continuous movement or motion around here, and then you're going to go around here once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, 7 times. So there's 7 additional bits of sealant you need to add. It takes ages getting all the silicone out of these channels. I'm just using a little watchmaker's screwdriver, which is exactly the same thickness as the channel. Now, obviously with just rubber gaskets, you've got to be careful, or paper gaskets, you've got to be careful not to scratch the surfaces. With silicone, obviously the silicone isn't going to fill in any of those little micro scratches that you may accidentally make with the screwdriver. We've cleaned both surfaces up to the best of our ability, and we're going to apply sealant to this surface here using the Mercedes sealant. That's the part number there. This sealant is actually hidden on the tube itself. Thoroughly dry and clean surfaces, sealing surfaces. Apply product to sealing surface as an even bead. Mount part within minutes. Use only for the intended purpose. It is much harder than it looks getting an even bead of silicone in that channel, and whether or not we actually succeeded is of course another question. What you're looking for is an even squeeze out of silicone all the way around the end there. Next up, we're going to put these screws in just finger tight to start off with. 4 Newton meters on these screws is hardly any torque at all. You do need to be careful that you do not strip these threads. So I'm just going finger tight to start off with. He's just being torqued to 3 Newton meters at the moment. And you do not want to over tighten them. Next up, we put the seal on, just making sure it's well seated. Now you can put a dab of grease along the bottom of here so that when you put the valve cover gasket in, it doesn't slide away. I'm not going to bother doing that because these are quite a tight fit. As I mentioned, it is so much easier doing this without the coil packs in place. Just got to make sure that this bracket at the end here is in the right place. You know, loosely put a couple of these bolts in to secure this. All of these bolts are in finger tight now. Now we're going to torque them to 4 Newton meters, starting from the inside, working our way out in a star pattern. All of these valve cover screws torqued to 9 Newton meters. You're going to need to use a range of different extensions to get to some of them, especially the back one. Next up, we're just going to reattach this fuel line, hopefully without cutting it. And just remember that this line here goes underneath the fuel line. The torque spec on this fuel line is 38 Newton meters from memory. You can actually get a crow's foot attachment for a normal torque wrench that will allow you to use open spanners, but I think if you just do it good and tight and then check afterwards that there's no leaks, you should be fine. Then we just need to reattach this. I've put a little bit of silicone on the inside of this. I was going to replace this line here, but in actual fact there's nothing much wrong with this one, and when we come to service these spark plugs in about 10,000 miles, I may take off all of this and replace that line then if need be. Now we'll put the coil packs on, remembering that the wire closest to your face is the one that goes closest to the fan belt. And I'm just going to put the lightest dab of blue thread lock on them before we put them back. Just remember, before you tighten these down, to put the cable ties in. There's 2 of them on this particular side. Once you've got those 2 cable ties in, you can tighten these up by hand first and then to 8 Newton meters. And then to finish the job, you just need to put the air box back on, remembering to plug the pipe in there. In our particular case, I am actually going to take this off again, this valve cover, and reseal this, because having done the other side and seeing what palaver it is, I realized that to do it in situ would be almost impossible. I'm going to leave this video here. I realized that I didn't put the crankshaft position sensor in, so I'll do that in a separate video. It is a little bit involved to actually find it, but that job there probably saved £500 to £1,000 in labor, and by far the trickiest thing is to get an even bead of sealant around those breather covers. But all in all, it's not too difficult a job, and it will keep your engine bay nice and tidy and good for another 50,000 miles or 20 years.